Welcome to the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. I'm your host, FoodTech marketing expert Megan Thomas. FoodTech Stories features the leaders pioneering new approaches to technology, collaboration, and storytelling in the food tech and ag tech space. Food and agriculture are changing, and fresh ideas and leadership are needed to sustainably feed the growing global population. Join us every other week as we talk to a founder, operator, or visionary in food and agriculture. Today, our guest is Dan Jenkins, VP of Regulatory and Government Affairs at CRISPR ag company Pairwise. Dan will share his perspective on how to build alignment around policy for emerging technologies in food and ag, using stakeholder engagement, networking, and other nuanced approaches. Prior to joining Pairwise, Dan was the Managing Director and Chief of Staff for BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. He holds a JD from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles and is a wicked beer league hockey player, as I understand. Dan, welcome to Food Tech Stories.
Thanks, Megan. It's really nice to be here. I appreciate that introduction.
Of course. Well, Dan, I know that you have an eclectic background and you've worked in many different areas and many different environments in the food and agriculture space. So I'd like to start how diverse stakeholders can come together to drive progress around tech-driven innovation in food and agriculture.
First, I would start by emphasizing it is really important to have the diverse set of stakeholders come together. If you're trying to accomplish something, you do need to have all those different people, groups, what have you, that care a lot about the topic as well. And they may think differently, but you really do need to try to engage with them and listen and get them around the table if you can. How do they come together? In my mind, it doesn't start with you telling them. It starts with you asking them what their needs and what their priorities and principles are, and then seeing if there's common ground. A lot of times there are things that you can come together on. For example, in the CRISPR and the space that we work in with plants, the technology has really high potential. I think that it deserves some of the hype, I guess, to make things better for growers, for consumers, and for the climate. So those kinds of goals are the starting point, are a way where you can get a lot of people to sit down and maybe drive the progress that we're looking for technology and innovation, because we are all looking to solve some of those problems.
Absolutely. So are there specific techniques that you've used in the past or approaches that you found to be particularly effective to get people to come to the table?
Yeah, first and foremost, be authentic. That is certainly a pretty, I don't know if I'd call it a technique, that almost makes it sound inauthentic, right? But like it needs to be honest and it needs to be real. Leading with, again, questions about what are your priorities and concerns? And then through your conversations and discussions, demonstrate that you're serious about their concerns as well, and demonstrate that you have competency to discuss and work towards goals in a common manner. And that ends up building trust. In my mind, those elements of being really authentic and putting them first, and then demonstrating that you are indeed, hey, I actually do know a little bit about this and really do care about it too. And those things matter the most, because eventually then someone who was a stranger now is maybe thinking more like a collaborator. So all that stuff should lead towards having a collaborative relationship.
And so once you have folks to the table, what next?
When you get down to it, we're trying to accomplish something here. So are we on the same page with respect to the outcome? Do we have a similar goal in mind? Let's talk in detail about what that is, why we think it's important, and by when we want to try to get that thing done. From there, you get into, well, how? Given that we're aligned on the why and the what, that's what's next. And that's where some of the difficulty really starts to happen, I think. If you start to get into the details of it, it can be a bit of a challenge.
What makes it so challenging in your experience?
The struggle can be at times to keep bringing people back to what's important here is not you or me.
Right.
It's not your company or my company or your organization. You could be an NGO. You could work in various capacities. That's not what matters. What matters is the goal. So if you can get a little bit of the ego out of it, that's very helpful. I think one of the most important things to do is also give credit where it is due. Recognize when people are being helpful, doing the right thing, give them the limelight. It's not about you. It's about the goal. Give them that opportunity to shine, because they are trying to accomplish the same thing. We aligned on that. That's really, really helpful as well when you're working with a group of people trying to do these things. Oftentimes too, the how is beyond that is some of these things are really complicated problems. And walking in with kind of a solution-oriented mindset not to say that'll never happen, that can't work, but come in with proposals that maybe would work and keep things moving forward is the mindset you have to come in with. You have to prepare and have that.
I think of strong opinions loosely held, right? So coming in and looking for that common ground, right? Can you think of an example in your experience where some of the approaches you just discussed, like giving over the limelight, wrestling down intractable problems, an example of where you've seen it work really well when you had a team really come together to create some exciting or impactful?
I would point to one where maybe I wasn't so involved, but I think is a really good example. I think that on this topic of gene editing, and which is fairly recent, Nobel Prize winning innovation, you look at some of these countries or regions that in the past were really opposed to GMO, and that's been a pretty strong part of their culture for a long time. Like, so for example, and yet they were able to make change with respect to their regulations or their policies. So I would look to someplace like maybe the United Kingdom. They did a lot of outreach with all the different groups, agriculture and scientists and NGOs and policymakers. They did public comment periods. They did all these things. And then they had to work through creating the words and the text and the change that they wanted to manifest. And as they put it, to really help them achieve their environmental goals or sustainability goals, all these things. And it took them several years, but they did it. I think that's a model where you've got a lot of still folks that are opposed, some that are very enthusiastic, some that are scared, but they managed to pull everybody through it because they took the time to do that. And now you see Europe attempting to do the same.
That's a great example. Pairwise, your company, who you've been with for 5 years, utilizes CRISPR technology to deliver innovative products and solutions in food and agriculture. Now, CRISPR, as we know, is different from GMO, but I was wondering if you could speak to CRISPR specifically, being that you've been in this space for many years. Is there something unique about CRISPR technology in the food and ag space, or is it similar to other technologies that you've seen in the past?
No, I think there's something very unique and really, not to lean on the word too heavily, but really innovative about it. Something that won the Nobel Prize is kind of a big deal, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it is really remarkable. And the thing to understand here, without getting too deep into the weeds of it, is that there's this technology that allows you to make very precise changes in the plant's genome, its DNA, and its code, if you will. What's kind of wonderful about that is if you look at all of the genetic diversity within a plant or plants, a lot of that has been not necessarily lost, but we don't use a lot of it. When we look at like the produce aisle or picture crop here, there is so much that we have done for good reason to breed a tomato or a carrot or what have you to meet our needs so that it has the shelf life we want. It has the shippability that we want. It has the yield that we want. So we've necessarily bred for those things, but we've lost some other attributes. Well, that genetic diversity is there to make it taste great or different or colored different, but we've kind of lost it. What gene editing allows you to do is go back and again to that sort of wide river of genetic diversity, and you can pull some of that forward and just use what's already available within the plant potential. It's working within the plant potential to bring that forward. And what's really interesting about that is that if you're working in a crop like a cherry tree, which we are, or some of these other, what we call specialty crops in the United States, there hasn't been nearly as much as investment in them because breeding and working with them is really hard. They're not well understood, some of their genomes. Plus, if you're working in a tree, it takes forever. The fact that you've got this tool that allows you to make changes that would otherwise, in some cases, take you hundreds of years, it just allows you to do what you could have done much more quickly. The fact that that exists allows for investment to occur. And therefore, whether we're talking about trying to improve something for climate or for growers or for consumers, because agriculture is probably the only thing that touches all 17 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So whatever front you're working on there, agriculture can touch them. Well, having a tool that allows you to make whatever change you need and do it quickly to meet those external problems that are also changing quickly, well, it's at least innovative. It's pretty important.
If we look specifically, you mentioned the SDGs. If we look specifically toward those goals that are more sustainability focused. What comes to mind in terms of the importance of CRISPR gene editing to sustainability?
Sustainability, as we all know, has lots of dimensions, but
Correct.
There's work going on here with gene editing, and I'm going to stick to plants to make deeper root structures. So you've got carbon sequestration, but also that would also lend itself to probably drought tolerance. You have things like improved nutrition, which I think contributes to it because diet is important as well. But, we've taken a look at if you can make more attractive fruits and vegetables so that people shift a little bit more towards a plant-based diet, then there's significant carbon savings from that, as well as can you just, again, unlocking some of the plant's own potential here so that it can better resist disease or pests, and then you're probably using less chemical pesticides. There's also even some work going on with potential rubber production from plants, which is pretty cool. There's lots of different aspects. Cumulatively, if we do this right and the technology gets democratized in a sense, all that adds up to, I think, a pretty attractive sustainability picture.
That's very illuminating. So when you say democratize the technology, could you break that down?
I mean, in my mind, because I work in regulatory and policy, I think it's really a big element of it is whether or not the potential systems you have to go through to bring a product to market, whether or not those are really big burdens for you. Look, it's going to be tough to use the tools and get the edit and then grow the plant and do all those things. That takes time. But assuming that somebody has that wherewithal, because people can get a license for it. But then if you've got to go through really long, difficult regulatory process, I don't think many people would invest. And so one of the mistakes I think of the past, and the thing that really drove, quite honestly, a lot of market concentration, although there's multiple factors, in the GMO ag space was that it took so long and was so difficult and so expensive to put a GMO trait through all the regulatory systems around the world that only less than a handful of companies did it. And they only did it on large acre crops. They only did it in blockbuster traits like insect resistance or herbicide tolerance. So if the policy, if that sort of drawbridge is put back down so people can walk through, then you see a lot more people participating. And so I'll sort of finish the point here with a country like Argentina, which was the first out of its gate and saw the potential for the technology and also saw there's no reason from a safety standpoint to really overdo it here with regulation. They put in a very reasonable system in 2016 and they've since published the impact that had. And it used to be that they saw just a handful of companies doing what I was just describing and making lower submissions to the government. And now what they see is, it's big and small, it's startups, it's working in multiple different crops, it's working on all kinds of different traits. And I think that the USDA sees that here as well, if you were to look at their data. So that's what I'm speaking to with the democratization. It makes it, hopefully, a bigger, more robust engine for delivering on those benefits we were talking about before.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for breaking that down. So in this space around CRISPR, in specialty crops and row crops, is there a specific dimension that you have been surprised by?
Europe twice. And there's been other surprises too. One was when Europe had a court decision that said we're going to treat this like GMO. But the second was Europe, right on the heels of that, coming out and saying we can't have that and trying to move forward with a legislative process that does lower that sort of drawbridge so that people can more easily move through with gene edited products. I would say also what's been really surprising for me moving away from the policy front is, holy cow, it's true. You can do these things and they're not easy to do, but you can do them so much faster. For example, our company has worked on a trait for another company that hired us to do it in corn to improve yield. So we did this work for Bayer. We made a change that we think has probably really increased the yield of corn. They're going to have to figure out exactly what that number is, but let's just say it's at least 5%, if not 10%. And that kind of change, if you were working on that through conventional breeding, would just take decades and decades to do. And again, just having this tool and unlocking that potential in the plant meant that we were able to do it in a couple of years. Well, that's wonderful. the fact that it really can do what we say it can do is a very nice surprise. It's been kind of wonderful.
Yeah, I bet that it has been. So when you think about stakeholder engagement, and let's think about a literal situation when people are physically at the table working through some of these issues and finding solutions collaboratively, is there anyone missing from the table? Any organizations or individuals who should be there?
More often than not, there tends to be people like me, and there doesn't tend to be the farmers themselves enough.
Okay.
So I think that the farmers aren't there. I think it's kind of tough for farmers to take the time to get away from the farm. They get pulled on a lot of things, and what they do for a living is complicated and hard. I think that their voice is the most important one in a lot of ways. I'm not sure the consumer voice is always there either. I think it needs to be there. So you've got folks like myself that kind of work in these spaces, but those folks have to be in the table. I think that's a lesson from the past. So we made the effort there? I think that we have. That's been a nice surprise too, the reaction that we have gotten from consumers in terms of acceptance, and that we find that it gets better and more accepting as you go younger has been a nice surprise. I'd also would love to have more interaction with the NGOs that maybe felt differently about GMO, but might be open to talking about this. Because again, I come back to, boy, we've got common goals here. We want to help the environment too.
That's a really enlightening answer. Thank you for sharing that. So we're just about out of time. This has been a great discussion. I have one final question for you. When you look to the future, what are you most excited about?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm very excited about this company, that's for sure. I'm very excited about Pairwise and what we're doing.
I can tell.
Yeah, I am. I love it, and I believe in it. And when I look towards the future, I'm most excited about hopefully seeing a lot of other companies like us bringing these things to market, and that potential being realized. That will be such a happy day. I really look forward to that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dan Jenkins, VP of Regulatory and Government Affairs for CRISPR Ag company Pairwise. It's been great talking to you, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and keep an eye out for our bi-weekly episodes. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, founder of Ladder 17. FoodTech Stories is edited by TJG Media.